Hello, good evening, and welcome to the program. This is Daily Politics live on Trust TV, your go-to destination for everything politics, policy, and governance. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll begin the conversation with an analysis on the escalating humanitarian crisis following Tuesday's catastrophic flooding, which ravaged nearly 80% of Maiduguri, the Borno state capital, after the Alleges dam burst. As residents continue to tally their losses, running into billions of naira, alongside tragic human casualties, authorities are racing against time to address the growing humanitarian needs this environmental disaster has unleashed. Meanwhile, environmental and meteorological experts are reflecting on the gaps and lessons from this disaster, which has impacted well over 1 million people. They are exploring strategies to prevent future occurrences, while aid workers and military personnel are working overtime to provide relief to the affected communities. Now, to help us dive deeper into this conversation, we're joined tonight by environmental scientist Dr. Abdullahi Yusuf Rigasa. Dr. Rigasa is a former general manager of Kaduna Environmental Protection Agency. Alongside him is public affairs analyst Professor Hussain Tukur. Professor Hussain is a professor of public policy analysis, I beg your pardon, at Nasarawa State University in Kefi. Gentlemen, good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Okay. So let's set the stage for this conversation by taking a look at Bitrus Kurus's situation report from Maiduguri, the Borno state capital.
The flood submerged major parts of Maiduguri metropolis, including places like Monday Market, Post Office, the Zoo Park, Teaching Hospital, among others. The capital has been on a standstill as residents struggle to evacuate. Some of the residents said it's been more than 30 years since such disaster occurred in the state.
Ya taɓa faruwa shekara 30 da suka wuce, ko da kwana biyu ma ne yanzu.
The last time this kind of disaster happened is 30 years ago. Even at that time, the scale of destruction was not in this magnitude, as it only affected few areas. But this one is massive. I was lucky to evacuate my family to a safe location. The flood came with full force. I have never seen such devastation before, to the extent that the post office is no more, and also the market area. The last one that happened many years back wasn't like this. We appeal to the government to provide boats to help rescue those trapped by the water.
At the moment, many are hoping that residents at the affected locations will survive until help comes from the appropriate quarters.
Right, that is just to bring you up to speed with some of these developments. Already we understand that people across various parts of Maiduguri and Jere and all the other affected areas are trooping back to their homes, counting their losses, while the government promises more relief on the way from the federal and state governments. But of course, the losses, as you can imagine, are quite enormous. And Maiduguri has now become the focal point of a conversation that has already been ongoing over the past couple of months, because we've seen the pictures, we've seen the videos across the north, across the south. The flooding this year has been quite significant. So let's bring in our panel for tonight's conversation and unpack what we've been seeing over the past 48 hours and also what that signpost. Let me start with the expert in the conversation as regards to this particular conversation. This is your constituency. For the most part, a lot of experts say, listen, this is something that was foretold, so to say. We saw this coming from months ago. Why couldn't we have avoided this, in your view?
Yes, first, before I start, I want to send my sympathies to the people impacted by this natural disaster, because when over 80%, as you said, of the city is covered by water, that is a natural disaster and an act of God. Yes, but the reason why we are here is the failure of environmental governance at all levels, the local government, the state government, and to a large extent at the federal level. But when things like this happen, it's not the right thing to do is not to blame certain sectors of governance or even the impacted communities. Right now, I think the priority should be towards search and rescue and giving succor to those impacted by the flood. But it's something that has been foretold, and our flood early warning system in the country are actually up and doing, and they have foretold these events, except that probably the people that are supposed to take action, they have failed to act, either because they have not been empowered by enough resources, or maybe because they are negligent of their own duties. Though at this particular level, you can certainly see that something certainly will have happened, but the impact or the magnitude will not have manifested the way we are seeing today. So it's the failure of environmental governance that has led to where we are today.
And do you think it's fair to say that despite several occurrences in the past, whether it's 2012, which is one of those darkest memories that people have about flooding and the impact it has had on people as well as the environment. With this particular development, people are talking about the last time it happened in 1994. Would you say that government have been reacting appropriately towards some of these natural disasters, that with all the technology, with all the expertise and the information that we have, we still are unable to show some level of ability or capacity to deal with it in a convincing way that shows people that something is actually changing?
Yes, you see, what I just lump up everything, I call it failure of environmental governance. What it means is that people have disregarded, or are totally negligent of their environmental responsibilities. And that is what we call them at the level of community or the local government. And when we look at states, yes, in most states we have ministries of environment. Like in Kaduna, we have Kaduna State Environmental Protection Authority, which I had the privilege of running for 3 years. But you see, it's wanting for you to have the resource and professionals. You have the money, you have the professionals to put up the necessary flood mitigations within urban areas and areas that are vulnerable to flood. You can have the expert, but you may not have the resources. It is the responsibility of the political leadership to ensure that, yes, the professionals and the resources are brought together to ensure that appropriate mitigations, are put in place. But where these are disjointed, or there's a systemic failure on the part of the governance structure, the mitigations will not be there. And where communities are at risk, when you start looking for safeguards, you won't find them unless maybe you have a disaster of this level. That is when people become aware that there are certain resources that are supposed to be put in place for certain safeguards or mitigations, but it's already too late, because now the impact is already in place, and we have a national, if not even a global emergency, because I've heard international bodies trying to come together and bring whatever help they can to bring succor to the impacted communities. So we need to be able as a people to empower this structure of environmental governance. Most politicians, you see, when they are talking of environment, if you go to Ministry of Environment, is at the bottom of the political priority. But the environment should be either first, second, or third. It shouldn't be lower than the third priority.
You think the ranking is very poor?
Yes, the ranking is very poor.
At federal or at state level?
At all levels. All levels.
Right. Okay.
If I may ask you, just consider, when was the last time that you saw somebody called Maiduguri in your house? Far more than 30 years. And if Dubagari, that is the sanitarians, environmental health officers, if they have been working, communities will have been prepared, with the right safeguards, so that when things like this happen, they know what to do, they know where to go, they know who to call. But if you go to Maiduguri right now, the challenge is, if you wake up and you find yourself underwater, what will be your first reaction?
Prof, looking at this particular situation, it's safe to say that over the past 1 month or so, we've been inundated with some of these flooding incidents across different parts of the country. Do you think it's emblematic of a systemic failure? Because he was just talking about environmental governance or government, and you get the sense that that is what almost every other sector is suffering from, that this sense of negligence, this sense of lip service, always talking about the problem but not matching them with actions. What are your thoughts about what we've seen so far?
What we have seen so far is not different from any other sector, as you have pointed out. Governance at all levels, irrespective of whether it is environmental, education, health, is the same situation we find ourselves. What is important, as he has pointed out, is that the structure of governance, the policy component, the strategy for implementation of the policies, and the resources are not always there. While you have experts, they are limited in their capacity to deliver, not because they do not have the ability, but because the policy themselves, the programs require a lot of resources, which political leadership is not interested in listening to those requirements that need resources to invest. Therefore, the political class only sees investment where it can get democratic governance for election or for pressing. Yeah. I think there is need for all of us to look at all the critical areas, critical sectors that require that the nation must work in order to achieve the objective of development. If not, we'll continue to dance in one place and we may not have the ability to push forward. And that's why whenever we sit down, our conversation is to recount our problems rather than recount our achievements. And that when those structures are not in place, the required expertise is not in place, the resources are not prioritized in terms of expenditure, then there would always be recourse to why do we fail and how do we go forward.
In Nigeria, one of these popular adages, one of the most popular adages in the country is prevention is always better than cure, isn't it? And as I did pose the first question to Dr. Rigasa is, we saw this from a mile away, if not more, because NAMED's predictions are coming in quite regularly. The hydrological agency has also given its, we know Alo Dam, for instance, we know its capacity, we know the amount of rainfall to be expected. Does it surprise you that with all of this information and with all the technology available right now, we couldn't have prepared for a worst case scenario, such as what happened in Maiduguri?
It is not surprising. Let me give you an example. For instance, in Kano State, there are 24 dams. In Jigawa State, I believe there are 16 large dams. In Katsina, we have about 17. And look at only a portion of the Northwest. It may surprise you to understand that for the probably last 10 years, there was no assessment of the risk of those dams. And therefore, even the managers of those dams cannot give you accurately at any point in time in the past, despite NEMA's predictions, yes, whether the capacity of those dams are near a breaking point, whether water should be released and so on.
Are you saying there is no synergy across the agencies when it comes to sharing information?
Is that the system of environmental governance and other governance is that there is always a failure in the sense that those responsible do not get the required resources, or the strategy of implementation is not in place, or in some cases the experts are not there, only few have the ability to address those. And when there is requirement to involve other stakeholders, you find that the synergy of coming together to address, especially at the level of tiers of government, you find that the synergy is not there, and the resource ability of each of them to come together and address the issues are not always there. And that's why you find sometimes some programs, some projects, some policy takes a very long time to germinate and to have to put on course on implementation. And these are some of the major problems that we are always addressing when we sit down in conferences, in workshops to discuss. And at the end of the discussion, the priority are lined up and they are left fallow or idle.
How big are some of the gaps that we're talking about here in your view, as someone who has been in the system and who understands how it works? how big is, are some of these gaps that we're talking about?
Yeah, you see, if I may give you an example. You see, El-Rufai is one of the smartest politicians in this country, and when I serve under him, he is one person that has an eye for experts, people who know what they are doing, people that can add value to the community. And he embarked on one of the first initiatives of urban renewal projects. I believe that if you have gone to Kaduna, you will have seen the way the city has been transformed. The same thing with Kafancan and Zaria. And one of the components of urban renewal, which I believe that every state capital should have undertaken or should undertake every 20, 30 years, was that we were empowered to build and equally desilt, remove the trash in urban drains and water channels. And where there were no people 30 years ago, those places, people who areas that were not populated, they were contracted out for new drains to be given. And a standard was set for the block, for the concrete, and for the size, the width and the depth of all these urban drains. But along the way, the whole thing became politicized. But he was able to achieve about more than 50% of those drains were built. So the solution, not only for Kaduna, because he has started the project, the current government has to continue with the same thing. But you see, the responsibility of desilting is not the responsibility of state government. Desilting drains is the responsibility of citizens and communities. You don't expect the local government to come to your house and start clearing the drains right in front of your house.
The argument is there are areas in Maiduguri, for instance, part of the state capital, but are not that developed. They don't have the drains, they don't have, tarred roads and things like that. What do you say about the scale of the problem, the magnitude of the problem, such as this one, for instance, vis-a-vis available infrastructure that is supposed to mitigate the impact of such a disaster?
You see, in colonial times, where we started, we had these environmental health officers. When you are building your house, they will inspect your plan first, and they will go to the site and check out how many toilets do you have. Are your rooms well ventilated? What about the drains? Are they well built and in alignment with those of your neighbors? So that at least, there will be smooth flow of water. But when you kill the local government, what it means is that you have killed the environmental responsibilities at that level of governance. That is what I mean by failure of environmental governance. States are not supposed to be building drains right in front of people's houses. That is the responsibility of local government. And where you fail to live up to your responsibility, enforcement is not supposed to come from the state or the federal government. Enforcement is supposed to come from the local councils. Right now you have NEMA going to Maiduguri, trying to provide succor to the community, trying to find out what is wrong. No, at this level, somebody should already know what is wrong and how to mitigate these challenges.
I'm sure we have some of the footages there to show some of the key areas largely affected by it. You look at this is University of Maiduguri, for instance, right?
Yeah.
You expect that the infrastructure there should be able to adjust. Teaching hospital. The Shehu's Palace was also overwhelmed. This is the Shehu's Palace, by the way.
Yeah.
So, when we look at the scale of the problem, as well as the infrastructure that we're talking about, what parallels can you draw from other countries in situations like this? In Asia, for instance, we see a lot of sandbagging when there is an anticipation of flooding, so that they can redirect the flood waters into a particular path that may not be so disruptive at the end of the day.
If you look at this water, it appears to be static. So the water is trapped. The water channels are not working. If you look at cities like New York and Tokyo, the whole city is under an effective, what we call sustainable urban drainage systems. Cities all over the world are investing in drains. Look at what recently happened in Dubai. Nobody thought that a city like Dubai
could be flooded.
Can be affected by a flood of that magnitude. Because although on the surface, they have invested heavily in developmental projects, but they have failed to go underground and build the right water channels. It may surprise you that Abuja is the only city with a sewer. Even the coverage of that sewer,
quite limited.
Is very limited. And in a case like this, you are talking of a combined sewer, where wastewater from, industries and households will be channeled into that sewer. In a combined sewer, you also make provision for stormwater. Look at the city, right? Shehu's Palace. The water is not moving. Somebody must have planned that particular area. Maiduguri shouldn't be a city that has not been planned. Well, it may not be planned like Abuja, but you see, as I mentioned earlier, urban renewal is a continuous thing. So even in all cities like Zaria, for example, like Kano, like Maiduguri, where we have old cities, over time, political leadership should have provided the technocrats and technical and financial capacities for these cities to be able to regenerate themselves in view of the climate change challenges that we are going to face. We are facing now, and we are going to face more in the future. We need to evolve our urban cities.
I mean, a lot of complaints about all the monies that some of the state governments as well as the federal government have been pouring into infrastructure development. They're very big on commissioning some of these white elephant projects, but at the end of the day, we still, debate whether the infrastructure is enough to actually make a difference. But Prof, bringing you back into the conversation, let's talk about the aftermath. The cleaning up is ongoing. Relief is being delivered to some degree. We weren't prepared for this to happen, clearly. Even if we were, I suppose the preparation was not good enough to stop the worst case scenario from happening. But what do you make about the response to the damage, to the destruction and everything else? We saw the Nigerian military offer their services. We saw NEMA and the federal government promise intervention and things like that. But when people needed to move from point A to point B, we appeared not to be ready. I mean, the fire service department was also flooded, and I think we have some of the video there. So there wouldn't be much help, even if they wanted to help people figure things out. What do you make of our emergency services generally in situations like this?
Well, first of all, in an unprecedented circumstance, what you see is what can happen anywhere, even in developed countries. Because when you have a situation of this magnitude, all preparations, all mitigating arrangement policy have not been able to foresee this kind of magnitude. So the responses at the initial stage may be haphazard, and eventually agencies that are responsible at all levels will now come. And then the other supporting agencies like the military, the police, and other paramilitary can come in. Definitely, in such a circumstance, you find that, one, people in the preparation of mitigation policies must be aware of their role. Governmental agencies that are indirectly involved will also know exactly their role beforehand. And then the agencies responsible will now trigger the plan in which gradually all agencies will fall in and mitigating effort will be carried out. In this circumstance, it is gradually evolving. And we can't say exactly how it will evolve. It depends on the program that have been put in place for mitigation effort. In this unprecedented situation, you find that in some situation, all the arrangements can also collapse because all the people involved and all the agencies could be overwhelmed. So it is not new, but one important thing is that we should prepare and understand that mitigation effort is not only of the federal government, the state government, and the local government, but all neighboring communities at the community level, all neighboring local governments at the local government, all neighboring states at the state level have to come in. Because at a stage, the federal government may call for international support if such unprecedented circumstances cannot be overcome easily.
Yeah, so but Prof, just to double down on that, I mean, we've been here before and we've seen a much worse situation, haven't we, in 2012, where the casualty levels was quite significant, the scale of the destruction across so many parts of the country was quite evident. I mean, we have so many learning, teachable moments where we're going to say, okay, if the next one happens, we're going to be at least a little bit more prepared in terms of evacuation, in terms of providing medical services, in terms of rescue operations.
Yes.
No helicopter was deployed, no boats were deployed. I mean, we saw a couple of them from the Nigerian military corps when they were able to, but the scale itself is quite limited. So you juxtapose what NIMED said through their predictions, what the hydrological agency said. So it's safe to say that we were anticipating worst case scenario. Let's prepare for the worst case scenario and hope for the best. But we're dealing with the worst case scenario, and it appears that, you know, we're not ready.
Yes, we're not ready because the prediction alone cannot translate into mitigating effect unless government at all levels, especially environmental governance structure and agencies, take the responsibility, as well as the political class, because the political leadership is the one that determines what kind of preparation can be done at this local government, at this state level, and so on and so forth. And it is in that sense that collaboration can come in, and therefore mitigation can easily be available, and the community and the citizen can engage. But that has always been the failure. We have problems, we agree we have problems, we discuss the problem, we provide solution, and everyone goes to sleep. That is a problem of not only, as we said earlier, of environmental government, it cuts across all our sectors, education, and take for instance the ASU strike. How many years now? Reoccurring. Take for instance the strike in the health sector, reoccurring. Take for instance small and medium scale industry, the same prescription every day. It is because previous prescription have failed. Not because they have failed, because those responsible did not do the right thing.
Failure of implementation.
That's very critical.
If I may add, you see, where you have good institutional governance in terms of early warning system like NIMED and NISA, every state by now should have what is called a contingency plan, you know, for flood mitigation. That when this happens, this is what we are going to do. All stakeholders must have been mobilized and conscientized, and their role clearly defined for them, and the resources that they need clearly specified in that contingency plan. And what we did when I was in Kaduna, I could remember, we activated a drill. You know, we simulate a flash flood situation, and we call all the stakeholders to come together and at least play their role. Now, this drill activation is supposed to happen every year, since we know that the way we are, flood can happen, you know, at least once or twice within our urban or built environment, once or twice. But we are negligent of this responsibility. In Kaduna, it was the responsibility of SEMA. In some other states, you see government institutions struggling for this kind of responsibility, because people make more money from problems than from, you know, providing solutions. I think these are the key things that people need to actually focus on. Do we have a contingency plan? Is it actually actionable? Then have we conducted a drill, you know, simulating this particular situation, so that when it happens, you know, everybody knows what to do. Now NEMA has gone into Maiduguri, the army has gone in, you know, civil defense has gone in, fire service is already there. What are the specific roles of this agency? You can't just go and stand down and say, okay, you are a firefighter, now you have a flash flood situation. What am I going to do? You are already supposed to know what, you know, your role should be in case something like this happens. Remember, in United States, they have the issue of this flood, Katrina, you know, in United States. And so flash flood is no longer news. It happens virtually every day. We see it on TV. But the way we respond to it has not evolved over the years. We definitely need to improve. We can no longer continue to, you know, repeat the same actions and hope and pray that things will change. No, we have to do more than prayers. We need to act.
Ironically, the state government, through some of the messaging, it's telling the people is that they need to remain calm, but more importantly, prayerful. And I wonder what good that will do. But in talking about what is at the center of this catastrophe that we continue to witness, you're the expert. Talk to us about the imminent danger of climate change, because the more it happens, the more you get a sense that our government is not taking it serious, even though the evidence is there.
So the way forward, and I have always said it, is for communities and citizens to take their destinies into their own hands. Where there is failure of governance, especially what I said, environmental governance, what it means is that communities must be able to arm themselves with the necessary tools of survival where these things, occur. As I mentioned earlier, if you wake up, from your sleep and you find yourself, submerged in water, what do you do? Who do you call? Where do you go? So communities need to prefer this.
Are those solutions going to be big enough to actually make a difference at a community level?
Yes.
So what are some of those solutions?
Because the impact is at community level. The federal government can only mobilize resources, either as palliative or maybe to provide succor to impacted communities. But where you have to build, safeguard for a city like Kaduna, for example, because that's where I know, sometimes you need to put up an embankment. If you go to London, they put up embankment along River Thames, because that is what the experts suggest. If you go to Holland, their own strategy is different. If you go to Tokyo, they build huge water channels beneath the city. The same thing with New York. If you go to Akwa Ibom, this is one state that has heavily invested in, water channels. But if you come up north, it seems we're in love with building flyovers, on flimsy foundation, where the water channels, and you could see it in the videos. People are just climbing, looking for higher ground, so they climb in order to survive, to leave the flooded areas. So we need to reprioritize our developmental project. We need to give strong foundation, to our cities. We need to initiate, urban renewal project. These people that you mentioned, over 80% of the city has been submerged. The government should be looking at not only cleanup, but moving the whole population, to safer grounds, and then try to put in these sewers and other safeguards as well as mitigations before allowing people now to come back. You've seen a city like Cairo, for example. They are demolishing slums. They're demolishing slums and building new cities for their citizens. I haven't seen that in this place. So we need to, the reason why we have government is because of our expectation that government will improve the quality of life. But where there is failure, especially in environmental governance, communities and citizens must arm themselves with the necessary safeguards and mitigations so that they can be able to survive. Remember, hundreds and thousands of years ago, we are the inhabitants of these lands, and our forefathers were able to survive. So how can we fail to live up in that same environment? This thing is not the first time. As someone mentioned, 30 years ago it happened, and before that it happened, even before that, and it will continue to happen.
It's safe to say that institutional memory is failing us on this one when it comes to learning from some of our mistakes. But in talking about the political will, which is obviously lacking, because that political will is surely what we need to execute, to implement, and to put some of these fine blueprints into action plans that can actually make a difference. Give me a sense of what you think the short-term solutions can be, because there are states like Lagos and maybe Kaduna is also a good example on there, where listen, if they say this is a water channel, a waterway, and there are residential buildings there, the chances are that they're going to clear it out, regardless of who's involved. We've also seen part of that happening in Kano over the past few months, but much of it has been politicized in one way or the other. Do you think that federal and state governments will take this hard decision of looking at the damage that has become a recurring phenomenon to say, listen, to avoid the repetition of these disasters going forward, we have to do what is needful, even if it means moving people from one location to the other so that these disasters can better be managed? That is the way to go. Do you think that we're heading in that direction from the body language of the government?
We must head to that direction, even if we are not. One thing is that for any nation to develop, it requires political will and determination of the elite. It must have a consensus between the elite of where and how the nation should move forward. And in this country, we are lacking that. We have virtually problems in agreeing to address issues at the national level, at the state level. For instance, why do we have a recurring building collapse all over the country? Why do you have problems here and there? Is that we have courts, we have rules, we have regulation, but are they enforceable? Enforcement requires the political will, the determination, the support by the political elite, by the society, in order for such kind of policy programs to succeed. But one thing that is important is that there is currently enlightenment on the need to do so, and there is a rising pressure from all the citizenry to do that. I think if we all agree that that is the way forward, and we are determined to support that, and we are determined to put pressure on that, we are patriotic enough to ensure that, I think the political class will respond and we'll have our way.
Okay, let's play this particular clip of the Vice President visiting his hometown, in the aftermath of this particular disaster. And many Nigerians have, given their views about it, saying, listen, it's quite obvious that we don't know how to manage, situations like this.
No. We know. I can tell you that I have a PhD in environmental management.
You saw the the sport utility vehicles driving in water. You saw the Vice President in the water itself.
Yes, we saw.
So is that what you're going to see if this was the case in anywhere else where their management is much more?
Sometimes, yes. I could remember seeing ministers in boats.
Well, boats is different from getting yourself into the water.
During the previous administration, that the Vice President was in a helicopter around Lokoja, trying to, assess the impact of the flash flood then. You see, we have capacity. We have more than enough professors. We have more than enough technical expertise. What I'm saying is that the politicians need to recognize that we have enough expertise in this country to provide solution to what is happening. But they also need to shoulder the responsibility. We cannot, I didn't appoint myself as a general manager of KEPA, for example. It was Erufai who felt that, well, let's give this guy a shot. So the politician needs to know that they have that responsibility to fish out this expert from whatever they are, whether they are within the country or even abroad. Bring them home. This is the challenge. Provide solution. Provide solution. We have that capacity. It's not that we don't know what to do, but if you are not called and you are not, or if you are called and you are not adequately empowered, what can you do? There's limit to what you can do. But at the end of the day, this is our country. Just like the people of Holland, are being admired all over the world for what they have done to their country. We have that capacity to transform this country and mitigate and even put this kind of incident behind us. Remember, it happened in Turkey, but Turkey brought their expert. What are the solutions? We have money for you. And how they are profiling solution. There is no one single bullet to what is happening. It has to cut across disciplines. We have engineers in building, we have environmental engineers, we have builders, we have those that are expert in urban planning, we have even social scientists to tell us, the trends the social, the way society adopt. So a whole lot of disciplines are involved. You need to conceptualize this urban renewal, programs. It's going to be different. Malam started it in Kaduna, but I haven't seen the same thing being replicated in other cities. It's not only in flood, where you have governance failures at several levels. What you have is an all-inclusive program, like the Urban Renewal Project, that will bring all the experts. You want to transform your slums into world-class cities. It's not something that can be done within, say, 8 years of one government. No, there has to be continuity of good governance at that level. That is the only way we can be able to mitigate not only flood, but equally our other problems that is facing us as a nation.
We've continually talked about this lack of consistency in terms of government policies and programs. We talk about developmental plans. Obasanjo had his, the Yar'Adua administration came with its own agenda. The Goodluck administration also wanted to go in a different direction. The Buhari administration completely wanted to do something out of the box from what the PDP wanted to do, or take in the direction that PDP was taking Nigeria. In fact, he said the whole 16 years was a big mess. And now we are where we are with the APC administration under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Just to piggyback off the conversation he said about continuity in terms of infrastructure development, in terms of the vision for the state, communities, and the country at large, how do we get over this personalization of the agenda from the politician himself, who is either the governor or the president, to understand that the long-term goal is to move the country in the right direction? Because apparently the politicians want to also always make their own mark by trying to do something different from what was already in motion.
And that's where we are all wrong. All countries have policy, they have plans, they have projects, and there are priority projects where everyone that comes must ensure that that project continues. And that is what we are lacking. Every politician will like to be associated with particular project, but even outside the country where democracy has been there for a very long time, what we see is that the difference in terms of priority is not in terms of priority. It's in terms of which project fall under which priority. And that is very important. Take, for instance, the National Development Plan. The National Development Plan that we had since the 60s up to 70s, the rolling plan and so on and so forth, were not implemented simply because every government that come in was interested in something different. It has no recourse to refer to what is in the plan. The same applies when you look at 1999 to date. From successive government, either at the state level, at the federal level, at the local level. Every government that comes with a plan. All the policies that, right from Obasanjo to today, the priorities are there, they are the same. But the projects that they implemented tells you clearly that they are not interested in the priorities, but they are interested in the quantum of the project and the resources that come with the project. At the end of the day, you have retinue of all, not only all abandoned projects, but hanging policies and projects all over.
Is there a back door to which this policy ideas or programs can be institutionalized in your view, so much so that even if a PDP president comes next in 2027, or Labour Party or NNPP or any other political party, there would be no room to deviate from the plan?
Yes, some of them are backed by law. Some of the policies of the plan are backed by law. There are fundamental ones that are contained in the Constitution. We see them. But definitely these politicians that do not have the country at their heart, are not patriotic enough to consider the country first, will continue to do so. Once you are in government and you decide to violate the law, and that there is no pressure from the society to say no, such thing can continue to happen. But it is important that we all realize as a nation, as citizens, as institution that we must work to ensure that laws that we enact or we promulgate are meant to be obeyed, and they must, in all circumstances, be obeyed. And that at all times, let's ensure that what is right is done, irrespective of who is engaged or whose goal is affected. This is very important. A society in which impunity is becoming gradually taking over some of the values of the society, it is very, very fearful that such society can. So the best thing is for all stakeholders, including religious leaders, traditional institutions, political institutions, and governmental institutions at all levels, irrespective of whether it is environmental, educational, we should come together, reflect, and believe that this country is ours and that it must develop. And there are ingredients and resources for that development. And we should all commit ourselves towards that. And we have the capacity in all our institutions. We can see. Why do we even think our institutions do not have the capacity to execute? We shouldn't. We have all. Therefore, we as human beings, as individuals, as Nigerians, need to refocus and determine our fate by ourselves rather than continue to enumerate our problem, continue to provide solutions, and yet we cannot move forward.
There's always a sense that, you know, some of the conversations are purely academic, even at the governmental level, that even when the experts meet, there's a summit, there is a coming together of all the brightest brains, they formulate it into a work plan, and at the end of the day, it's at the desk of a politician who is less than motivated to do it because it doesn't fit into perhaps a political strategy to win more elections to come. But let's talk about, I like a lot of idioms and figures of speech, and you know, this one is something that everybody can understand. Once bitten, twice shy. We always get a sense that we always get bitten by this same particular problem, as we've highlighted over and over again. Help me square the circle with regards to climate change, how it is a global conversation for the past 2 decades, right? And it continues to gain momentum. Africa is kind of sitting on the sidelines about what it can and what it cannot do, looking at its own contributions to the conversation, but it is quite obvious. You talk about Maiduguri, for instance, and the impact of desertification. We've seen the situation become worse and worse year on year. What are your thoughts about what we're doing to reverse this through the various initiatives, whether it's the Great Green Wall or our commitment to some of the treaties as well as global plans to help lower the temperature, because this is a part of the conversation, the heavy downpours and everything else that we've witnessed over the past few weeks.
Yes, you see, our latest addition to the climate change, to the institutionalization of climate change mitigation is the NCC, and that is the highest level of climate change mitigation. But I think most sub-Saharan countries, and that is to say most African countries, are expecting that financing for adaptation and mitigation is supposed to come from the developed world. And in reality, this money is not forthcoming. A city like Maiduguri, for example, clearly needs to have a department, consisting of dedicated climate change mitigation and adaptation, experts who will sit down and draw a climate change mitigation plan, which has to be financed, substantially from what is locally available. Because if you rely on these multinational development partners, the chances of you getting these safeguards and mitigation, in a timely manner, will fade. So the idea that we can sit down and do nothing until developed countries give us money to put off mitigation and adaptation, we need to change that. In every conference of parties, you see the level of participation of Nigeria. If we are not the first, second, we'll certainly be among the top 10. But that has not translated into adaptation and mitigation on the ground. Because, well, maybe at the level of governance, as I used to mention, we first should draw, employ the right experts, to put this mitigation and adaptation in place. That is where we are having challenges. But developed countries, if you go to maybe England or United States, you see all these, they have already been institutionalized. The universities are already working. The politicians are already working. Everybody has keyed into the national climate change adaptation strategy. But here is a different story.
There is always something quite peculiar about Nigeria. Unfortunately, I have a couple of other questions I would love for us to delve into, but unfortunately, for want of time, we're going to have to anchor the conversation here for now. Prof, thank you so much as always for obliging us and for sharing your thoughts with us on this one. Dr. Rigasa, I appreciate you for your expert analysis on this talking point. We hope to double down on this one at a subsequent engagement. Thank you both.
It is my pleasure.
My pleasure.
All right, that is our show for you tonight. Thank you most kindly for joining us. Feel free to join us again. We'll be back tomorrow live at 8 p.m. exclusive as always on Trust TV. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed. Good evening.